We're now on the bottom of Tes Vavim and Aleph. Omar Rabba Bar Shilo Lo. That which it says that he's a al taharo shel mizbeach. It doesn't mean on the outside of the mizbeach in the vertical and the middle point of Govo shel mizbeach, but rather ella agufei the mizbeach. We're talking about the gag hamizbeach, and that's where the Kohen Gadol, in the case of the mizbeach hapnimi in the Heichal, he had burnt the ketores in the middle of the mizbeach, and now he separates with his hands the gecholim, the coals, and he exposes the bottom of the gag of the mizbeach, which was covered by the ketores, by the gecholim of the ketores. That's called chote es ha'efer elich v'elich. He does a chitui, which is whenever you separate embers or coals, it's called chitui, like we had it in Masechet Shabbos in Perikira, elich v'elich, and now he exposes the middle of the mizbeach. That's called taharo shel mizbeach. The word tar means naki. It means clean. So he sort of like cleaned out the yechalim. And how do I know this? Tichsiv, I'll show you where the Torah itself uses the word tara, and it means that which is lashon nikayim, that which is cleaned out. Tichsiv, we're now at the end of Parshas Mishpat. I'll read the entire pasuk. It says, "Vayiru es Elokei Yisrael v'sachas raglov k'maisa livnas hasapir uki etzem hashamayim litoar." And this pasuk is describing the Mara, that vision that Nadav Avihu and the Ziknei Yisrael saw at the time of Matan Torah when they looked to see God, and they saw this clear vision that was Naki Vitsalul Kishamayim Nikim Lilo Anonim. The Torah is describing this vision as being crystal clear, like the sky on a blue day, on a clear day when there's no clouds. So now he's putting the dam on the gag of the mizbeach by cleaning out the gecholim here and there. We don't find any damim that are half lamala in the middle of the mizbeach and half lamata on the bottom half of the mizbeach. We're talking on the top of the mizbeach in the middle of the mizbeach. Now the Gemara wants to go further in its analysis of Reb Shimon Ish HaMitzpah with regard to this hybrid of the matan damim of the korban tamim. Maishna de yoyev ola bereisha v'hader yoyev de chatas. Why does Rabbi Shimon insist that first we begin with the shtayim of a korban ola, which means on the keren mizrachis tzfonis, and then afterwards he goes over to the Mairav and to the Durham with two separate zrikos in order to fulfill the korban chatas. Nesiv bereisha the chatas v'hader nesiv diola. Why not start with the two zrikos on the Mairav and the Durham like a chatas, and then come to the corner on the northeastern side and do the zrika of a korban ola? The Gemara answers, Keva di ola, because the essence of the korban, as the Torah describes it, is a korban ola, is he kadma bereisha. The Torah says, Alas tamid asuyah bar Sinai, regarding the tamid, it's an ola, and that's its fundamental, essential categorization. It's a korban ola. So we'll begin with the matan damim of a korban ola on the mizrachis tzfonis. Maishna diyoyev mizrachis tzfonis umarovis dromis. Why then does he begin with the mizrachis tzfonis, which is a kiyum of the zrik of an ola, and then he separates the maravis and the dromis to implement two zrikos as a korban chatos? Why not nesiv dromis mizrachis v'hadar tzfonis maravis? You know what you could do? You could start with the korban ola by choosing the southeastern side. Now, wait a second. You're on the east. You could either turn right to the north or left to the south. The Gemara is suggesting let him turn left to the south. Amri, the Gemara says the reason for that is because Ola Te'una Yisod. This is derived from a pasuk in Vayikra Dalet in the Gemara in Tvachim Daf Nun Aleph. It says El Yisod Mizbach HaOlah, that the Zrikas Adam should be on a place where there's the Yisod below it. And the Yisod was one Amma that jutted out on the base of the Mizbeach. So that clearly, based on this pasuk El Yisod Mizbach HaOlah, we require that in the case of Olah, the Zrika should be on the Yisod. Aaron, Dromas Mizrachis, Lo Havi Le Yisod. There was no Yisod on the southeastern side of the Mizbech. That side that corner did not have a Yisod. And this is derived from the Gemara about the part of the Mizbech that was in Binyamin's Chelik, the part of the Mizbech that was in Yehuda's Mizbech, in Yehuda's territory, and that's a sugya that we've touched upon in the past. Gemara is still wondering about the analysis of this avoda. Maishna diyoy bereisha mizrachis tzfonis v'hadar ma'aravis dromis, nesiv bereisha ma'aravis dromis v'hadar mizrachis tzfonis. Why not turn towards the south and then climb up towards the west? Because again, we need a zrika of an olah on the corner that would be shtayim, and then the diameter straight across on the other side, right? The two corners with a diameter in the middle. Why not begin with the Maravis Dromis? Why do you begin with the Tzvonis Mizrachis? And the Gemara says, "Came into Yom Mar Kol Pino Chatapon Lo Yu Ela Derech Yamin La Mizbeach." Meaning, whenever you turn around the Mizbeach, you always turn towards the right, and that's a principle that underlies all of the avodos of the Mizbeach. Now, the Kohen comes up on the south side, that's where the kevish is, and then he begins to go around the Mizbeach. He first turns towards his right side. The first thing that he gets to on the right side is the Kemen Dromis Tzfonis, Dromis Mizrachis, because he's already on the south side. He turns right towards the Mizrach, and therefore that's where he's going to do Beresha Dahu Poga. He's going to do the Zrika on that Keren, which is the Mizrachis Tzfonis, the first one that he reaches when he turns right. The Gemara asks, "Umimai deba olahu de kamarach mana ovidle maisachatos." How do you know that it's a carbon ola? And we're going to add to it on top the maisa vachatos. Dilma, maybe we should say the chatasu. Maybe the Torah is classifying the ola as fundamentally a carbon chatos. Who the kamarach mana ovidle maisa ola? Just add an ola to it. And therefore, according to this Havamin of the Gemara, what we would basically do are matanos on all sides of the Mizbeach, plus the Maisa Ola. So therefore, what we would do is he says, Yesh lasos b'soyer achatos k'maisa Ola. Tainu she'itein tchilosh. Just 1 second. Again, I just want to read this. He says, Ulai kavanas haTorah lehepach, Yesh lasos b'seir hachatos k'maisa ola. Hani she'yitain tchila shtei matanos k'maisa korban chatos. Lach mikan yitain achashi shtayim k'maisa korban ola. Right. Oh, so again, the Gemara is going back to its original question. Why do you begin the matanos of this korban ola as this korban tomen as an ola with the shtayim on Keren Mizrachis Tzfonis, and then you go ahead and you do the Ma'irav and the Durham as a Chatos? Why not begin and define this carbon as fundamentally a carbon Chatos? Lo tzalkedai. Iksiv, because the Torah says, Alalas hatamid yaseven isko. My kamar achmana midi the Chatos shdei aola. That it's really a carbon ola, And that which you normally would do to a chatos, we're going to add on as a maisa korban chatos to a korban ola, and not the other way around. Now we're going to study a different sugya that has to do with what's called lishkas hatloy. And that was located in the Mikdash. And Tanan Hasan, we learned in the Mishnah in the third parak of Talmud, Amar Lahem HaMimuna, Mimuna is what we call the Skan Kohen Gadol. He turned to the Kohenim, who on that particular day was Zocher in the pious amongst the base Av. They were the ones who are singled out to be Makriv, the Tarba, the Korban Tamid Shel Shachar. Tzeu ve'viu tle, bring a lamb for a Korban Tamid, min lishkas base hatloim. So there was a chamber where they kept the tloim. On a daily basis, there was enough to cover both the Tamid Shel Shachar, the Tamid Shel Bein Arbayim, and they would go into that lishka to prepare these tloim and check them out to make sure that they didn't have any blemishes, any mum, and therefore they were prepared for hakrava. And now, where was this lishka located? That's what the Mishnah in Talmud is going to address now. V'halo, sometimes the word v'halo introduces a question. Here, v'halo means you should know. Lishkas hatloim haisa b'miksoa tzfonis maravis. Okay, now here we have to introduce another major location in the Beis Hamikdash complex, which is called the Beis Hamoked Hagadol. And he writes here, Ulam Gadol, Bechomas Hamikdash, on the northern side of the wall of the Mikdash, moving towards the west, was a gigantic hall, which is called the Beis Hamoked, Ulam Gadol. He actually has a picture of it here in the Mesifta. And inside this Beis Hamoked, they kept a fire going, a major fire, 24/7, so that the Kohanim could come in and warm up their feet because they were very cold, walking barefoot on the cold floor, the marble stone floor of the Ritzpas Hazorah. Now, on four corners of this great Beis Hamoked, there were four chambers. And now we're going to learn about these four chambers. One of them is called the Lishkas Hatloim, and that was in the northwestern side or corner of this great hall of flame, of Moked. So there was Arba L'Shakos Hayusham. On each one of four corners, there was a chamber that would open up into the Beis HaMoked. Achas, one of them was Lishkas HaTloim that we mentioned before, which is in the northwestern side. Achas Lishkas HaChosamos, which means that a person who was obligated to bring, together with his korban, soles, shemen, or yayin, lemincha, ulenesachim, all korbanos of behema, of ola and shlamim, whether shel yachid or shel tzibur, requires soles, yayin, lenesachim, and chatos v'hashamos don't require nesachim, except in the case of chatos v'yacham mitzora, and bechar u'maiser pesach don't require nesachim. So in each case, depending upon what his obligation was and which korban he was bringing, he would go to the memuna, the person in charge of these receipts, these seals. He would give them enough money to pay for the soles or for the nesachim or for the ayin, whatever he needed, the shemen, and the memuna would give him a signed or sealed receipt for that amount of money. And then when he came around later on with that, and he produced this receipt, then they would give him whatever was included in that sum of money from the minchos and Menachos and the Nesach. And he handed in this receipt, and that he got in exchange the Mincha and the Nesach. So there was a special lishka where these chosamos, these seals, were left, and that was called the lishkas hachosamos. Achas lishkas beis hamoke. There was a smaller fireplace, a beis hamoke, a chamber where they had a fire going. And here we have a whole discussion amongst the Rishonim exactly why they needed a smaller lishkas beis hamoke in this larger Beis Hamoked. The Ravid says that's called Tzarche Beis Hamoked Agadol Haybelishke Zu. Knows whatever you needed to serve, to function in the big Beis Hamoked were kept in the small Beis Hamoked. Going kalim, whatever utensils they needed for Tikkun Hamidorah, to fix up the fire, make sure the campfire was rising properly. The Rosh, on the other hand, says that this small lishka of the Beis Hamoked was a Madura Katana, which is a much smaller campfire, and the purpose was to use that to light the Moked HaGadol in case you needed a flame for the Moked HaGadol. If it was extinguished, they would go into this Lishkas Beis Hamoked. Achas Lishka Shosim Behem Lechem Haponim. And then there was a special Lishka, a special chamber where they prepared the lechem aponim. B'chol Shabbos they would bring 12 lechem aponim. They would organize it on the shulchan in the heichal in two vertical groups of 6 chalos, one on top of the other. And Mishpachas Beis Garmo, they were the experts on how to produce and bake these breads. So they had a special lishka where they would prepare these breads. So all these 4 lishakos were on 4 corners of the Beis Hamoked HaGadol. I have a little bit of a diagram here where he shows you Myra of Mizrach, Tzafon, and Daram. He shows you where the Chosamos were, the Tloim, the Lechem Aponim, the Moked. The Tloim, in fact, was on the Tzafon side, but at the corner of Myra. So now that we learned this Mishnah in Talmud, that the Lishkas HaTloim was on the northwestern corner of the Beis Hamoked Reminu, we're going to ask a stira from another Mishnah, this time in Masechet Midos. So we're asking a stira from Talmud to Midos. And in Masechet Midos, it says, Arba l'shakos hayu leBeis Hamoked. There were 4 chambers on the 4 corners of the Beis Hamoked. And they were, the Mishnah compares it to kitonios hapsuchos litraklin. Like, for example, you could have a very large vestibule, and you could have smaller rooms that spill into this vestibule. I remember when I used to live in New York, there was, a museum. What was it called? I think it was called the Frick Museum, Frick. You could look it up in Google. And there was a millionaire in New York, a billionaire by the name of Frick. And when he died, he left his mansion on 5th Avenue as a gift to the city of New York. And it became a museum. I mean, it's an amazing collection of art. I mean, me personally, I go there because of the Dutch art. He's got Vermeer in the Frick. I mean, Vermeer is so rare. Anyway, it's also this gigantic palace, and you have smaller rooms, very complicated, that lead into this one large tracklin. I think they even, if I remember correctly, they have a bench where you could sit in the middle of the tracklin. Anyway, that's what the Beis Hamoked HaGadol looked like. It had these 4 chambers that spilled into the larger area where the Beis Hamoked was. And the Mishnah in Masechta Midos says the following: Shtayim bakodesh ushtayim bachol, which means that do we have what's called Kedushas Azara in these Lishakos of the Beis HaMoked? And if you take a look at the picture, the Beis HaMoked is located half inside the Azara and half outside the Azara. And two of these chambers were in the inside of the Azara, by Kodesh, and therefore they had Kedusha. Two of them were on the side or that part of the Beis HaMoked that was Bechol, and they did not have Kedushas Beis HaMikdash. And in order to separate from that which is sanctified as Azor and that which is not sanctified, but rather is Chol, Roshei Paspasin, which are Chatichos Eitzim, they used to set up certain vertical, almost trees or parts of trees, and they were Kvuim B'Karka Beis HaMoked. They actually put them, planted them, so to speak, in the ground of the Beis HaMoked, and these fispasin, these atichos eitzim, the word fispasin actually is a word from Masechet Bava Basra, if you're familiar. Anyway, mavdilin, they were a heker, a simon, bein kodesh lechol. And now the Mishnah goes through the lishakos and tells you the function of each one. Uma hoya mishamshos. And he says the following: the lishkan, the maravis dromis, he hoisa lishkas hatloim tloi karma. That's where they had the kvasim that they would check out to make sure that there's no mum. So that was designated for the carbon tamid that was on the maravis dromis. Now that's against our Mishnah, and we saw already in Tamid that the lishkas hatloim was not on the maravis dromis, but rather was on the maravis tzfonis. So we have a contradiction between these two mishnayos. And what was on the dromis mizrachis side of the Beis HaMoked, according to the Mishnah Midos, was he lishka shayu otzim b'shtei alechem, and then the lishka on the mizrachis tzfonis side. And we said that, and the Mishnah says that Mizrachis Tzfonis is Ba Gonzu Beis Chashmonoi Avnei Mizbeach Shektum Malchei Yovan. When they were maktir on the Mizbeach, the Malchei Yovan worshipped idols, Avodah Zarah, and they disqualified those Avnei HaMizbeach for use in Kodesh. But nevertheless, they didn't want to do away with these avodim because they originally had kedushas avnei hamikdash, and therefore they put them into gniza, so to speak, in a separate chamber, a lishka that was on the mizrachis tzfonis of the Beis HaMoked HaGadol. And finally, tzfonis maravis, which again we said before, based on the Mishnah in Tamid, that's Tzfonis Maravis, right? We're on Tzfonis Maravis. We said that was the Luchkas HaTloim, and now based on the Mishnah in Midos, we're saying is that was Ba Yordin LeBeis HaTvila. That if a Kohen saw Keri, and he's not allowed to work in the Mikdash and do the Avodah because he's Tameh, he would go down through this Lishka, and underneath this lishka, there was a mechila overes, a certain digging underneath the lishka, and he would go through the steps of that subterranean set of stairs until he reached the Beis HaTvila. But in any event, in this Mishnah, it's absolutely explicit that the lishkas hatloim was on the Keren Maravis dromis. Our Mishnah in Talmud that we quoted had located the lishkas hatloim not on the Keren Maravis dromis, but rather on the Keren Maravis tzfonis. So now we have two diagrams how to situate and locate the four lishakos of the Beis HaMoked HaGadol and the contradiction between them. And the Gemara answers, and with this we'll conclude our learning for today. Omer Avhuna Mantana Midos, who is the author of the Mishnah Midos, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. And what we're going to do is we're going to say that since we're going to prove that at least in one of the Mishnayos and Midos, the Mishnah reflects the unique sheet of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, we're going to assume that the entire Masechet Midos is written and reflects the shita consistently of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and he's the one who holds that the Lishkas HaTloim was on the Keren Maravis Dromis. That's the Mishnah in Midos that we just saw. And the Mishnah in Masechet Tamid is written according and reflects a different Tana who holds that the Lishkas HaTloim was in fact on the Keren Maravis Tzfonis. And now Rav Huna is going to embark upon an endeavor to try to prove that the author of Mishnayos Masechta Midos is none other than Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. So this is where we're going to stop today. Here on Daf Tezayin Amud Aleph, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines down from the top, with the word Disnan. Okay, then, wishing you a fabulous day. Thank you so much.